and welcome back. I'm Mike Quincy.
I'm Michael Crossan.
I'm Gabe Shenauer.
So in today's podcast, you'll just have to bear with me a little bit. My throat isn't too great, but it's too an important vehicle to pass up an opportunity to talk about. And that, of course, is the 2025 Toyota Camry. And the big news about this vehicle is that all models come standard with a hybrid powertrain. No more straight four-cylinder, no more V6. And that has probably its strengths and weaknesses depending on who you talk to. And right now we're going to talk to Gabe Shenauer. And so tell me, is this a smart move by Toyota or is it too risky?
Well, the exclusivity of the hybrid powertrain is not something new for Toyota. They've done it with the Venza, the Sienna, the Crown, etc. And it seems to be catching on with consumers. Among our members, we've seen that traditionally when they offered the hybrid powertrain and regular powertrain, the percentage of hybrid takers was quite considerable. So I think this is part of the normalization of the hybrid powertrain. Just like a few years ago, turbo became very proliferant.
Not as exotic as it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, you don't see a turbo badge on cars anymore.
Right.
And you may not see a hybrid badge on cars going forward. I mean, I think consumers want to get the good fuel economy, and they may not know or care that it's a hybrid even.
Mike, do you think this is like a nice little cautious step that consumers can take toward like partial electrification?
Yeah, I don't think there's a problem with going hybrid now. And I think we can all agree if a hybrid drivetrain is done well, it's usually better than the gas-only version. And in many cases, there's a bunch of cars I could name for that. So I sort of applaud them for that. I think they've done a pretty decent job here with this hybrid powertrain, and we'll get into that sort of how it drives and things like that. But yeah, I would not be afraid to make this my first hybrid.
Right, and with the evolution of hybrids, it's always been about fuel economy. And Toyota says the new Camry should get between 44 and 51 miles per gallon.
Big claim.
Oh yeah, I mean, Toyota in our testing, usually comes across as being among the most fuel efficient brands, depending on the model, certainly.
Yeah, the previous generation got really great fuel economy, almost matching that of the Prius. So that's very commendable. The varying fuel economy, some might wonder, is because of different trim lines, different tire size, more better equipped versions with sunroof or without, so different weights.
Or front wheel drive or solid drive. But you bring up a very good point.
Yeah.
And certainly as fans of Consumer Reports knows, we're going to buy our own test car and do our own measurements for fuel economy. But it's needless to say, we're fairly optimistic about this. Other news about the 2025 Camry is blind spot warning and rear cross traffic warning are standard on all trims.
It's awesome.
So that's really good to see. All-wheel drive is also available on all trim lines, which is also good.
One thing about the all-wheel drive, this time it's not a physically connected all-wheel drive, so it's an electric motor driving the rear axle. So less weight, less friction. So there may not be such a huge difference in fuel economy between the front-wheel drive and the all-wheel drive this time.
Right. It also shows that Toyota has evolved their technology. They learn more, and they find better ways to produce all-wheel drive and do it in a lighter, more efficient manner. So that is also really noteworthy. We rented two 2025 Camry sedans from Toyota to perform our kind of first impressions. We got an SE model, which is probably among the more popular trim lines, and we also got a very well-equipped XLE model. The LE, which is the entry-level model, starts at $28,400. We'll probably be buying an SE, as Gabe has pointed out to me before, for our test program, which costs about $30,700. But let's start into how it drives, and Gabe, I'll start with you.
There's a certain community out there that likes to bash the Camry as if it handles like a 1964 Buick. And nowadays the Camry is a pretty well-rounded car. It's always been. But handling-wise, it's right up there with other family sedans. It handles pretty nimbly. One thing I would mention is that the X versions, XLE and XSE have more sound insulation and also acoustic glass on the side windows. The SE and XSE have a firmer suspension, so the handling is a little tighter. I mean, slightly more agile.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying about how Toyota has been tuning the suspension for the Camry over the last few years. It's not the boring car that it always was. Maybe, Toyota's experience in racing has, translated into making a Camry a much more enjoyable model. And you made one specific observation about the XLE that stuck out to me.
Yeah, I drove them both, and I drove our SE first that we had as the rented car, and then had the X, and that had as a sunroof. And immediately getting in the car, there was way less headroom. My head was right up against sort of there's a lower portion right by the roof, and then you do get a little more room, like when the sunroof sort of, the glass area there. So I had to adjust the seat, and even with the seat in its lowest position, my hair was still rubbing the headliner. So I kind of had to lay the seat back a little bit, which sort of wasn't my preferred driving position. So I kind of had to make a decision, my head bouncing off the roof, or do I want to just lean back a little bit and try to get more comfortable? So personally, I would go for one without the sunroof. I also found it to be a little noisy from the sunroof too.
Right.
But I think Gabe made great observations on the driving impressions on this thing, the way it handles, the way it rides, really, really nice. And I would just say, this is a Camry, right? You could probably put any of us in it blindfolded and say, hey, Mike, guess what car you're in? And you'd probably guess that it's a Camry.
Right.
And it's not a bad thing, I don't think.
That's been the case with every Camry through its entire generation run.
Right. And I think it works for them because people buy multiple Camrys. They just go from one to the next. And if this is your first Camry or your fourth Camry, I think you're probably going to be pretty impressed with what they've done here.
Right. And you take the blindfold analogy and have somebody just riding it, but then you take the blindfold off them and say, figure out the controls in a matter of minutes. Mm-hmm. And likely they will be able to.
Yes.
So kind of kudos to Toyota for making the controls pretty straightforward. There's lots of large buttons. There's a traditional gear selector, which we like. And so I think that kind of the familiarization, to go on your point, past Camry buyers get into this new one, they're not going to be flummoxed by a huge screen that spans the entire dashboard, for example, which is smart. Toyota knows their buyers, right?
Oh, of course. When you sell 300,000 of them a year, then you know your buyer, and you're also careful not to make too radical of changes.
Right. And looking back in history, something that like Ford did with the Tourist, they went to that ovally shape, and it completely killed the sales because of the styling. So they got to be careful about that. Another thing that I noticed driving both Camrys is really good visibility. Mm-hmm. I like the fact that the roof pillars are pretty thin. I like the fact that there's a lot of glass area. Good visibility all around goes a long way with me. But we did also find some differences with like the displays between the XLE and the SE. You guys want to talk about that a little bit?
So the XLE trim had a 12.3-inch screen, so a little bit bigger, which can be nicer, right? Because there's a lot of things displayed in there, so you get a little more real estate for it. But I know that we had some of our drivers and testers felt that it was just a little difficult to use. Lots of menus and sort of sub-menus, and you got to kind of dig your way through all of these, right? And I know for me, too, that's a thing. I like stuff that's really easy to use, and Toyotas in general, I find a lot of their infotainment and their instrument cluster to be really kind of cluttered and crowded.
Right.
So the SE that we had rented and drove had less of that. Few less buttons, things were marked maybe a little bit clearer, I think. So for me, that's a plus. I suppose if you really buy the car and live with the car, you're going to kind of get it set up yourself. I got in the car maybe after you, and you had to set up one way, and I want to experiment with it and play around with it. And Gabe gets in the car and he's going to set it up for himself. Right. So some of that may go away if you're an owner, but still it's just sort of menu after menu, right, through this screen.
Yeah, one thing about the XLE with a 12.3, some of the critique wasn't about the center screen so much, but about the cluster or the driver screen, which is configurable, and with steering wheel buttons, you can choose what display you want to see. So that's a little fussy and a little tricky to deal with.
All right, and let's get down to how the seats work, because sometimes Toyota seats, for me, are always like a little short on cushion support. But I found these seats fairly decent, at least in the SE, which is the car that I spent most time. What did you guys think of the seats, Gabe?
Yeah, I thought it was a reasonable seat so far. According to my short stint, I haven't taken it on any long trips or on my super long commute yet. But in short order, when we get our own, we'll know more about that.
Yeah, I think it's no secret. I've said that I sort of love the new Accord, especially the hybrid. And the one thing we don't like about that are the seats. And that would probably maybe keep some people from buying one, especially if you had a long commute. I thought the seat was pretty good. I did notice there was a lot of lumbar. And I thought it was maybe just whoever was in it before me had...
Like built-in lumbar.
Yeah, so I thought maybe the lumbar was just like, cranked up to the max, but it wasn't. The lumbar had been turned all the way down. There's still a lot of built-in lumbar in the seat, which I didn't necessarily mind so much. But I definitely think, that might be a consideration for some people. That might be sort of the one sticking point for me. If you did find that sort of lower back area, maybe not so comfortable.
Yeah, I think the SE and the XLE also, but both had two-way lumbar support, which I found effective. I spent about 10 hours driving the SE model up in Vermont. Really enjoyed the drive overall. Totally agree on some of the wind noise. Not a deal breaker, but definitely was there. I found the seat pretty good that held up over that long of a drive. And it also reminded me of years ago, we tested a Camry hybrid. And when my boys were younger, we went on a trip to Mount Washington up in New Hampshire. We left Connecticut with a full tank of fuel. We went to New Hampshire, went up Mount Washington, down Mount Washington, spent a few days in that town. And it wasn't until halfway through Massachusetts on the way home to Connecticut that we had to stop for fuel. So that to me cemented what a Camry hybrid is really, really good at, and that's road trips.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally, yeah. I mean, that reminds me, and then about 15 years ago, we took a Camry hybrid to Toronto, and my kids were little there, and one of them said, "Hey, how come we never stop for gas on this trip?"
Right. And, we talk about Toyota's, stellar brand reliability. They really have mastered hybrid technology, hybrid reliability. These are complicated machines. They have a lot of things going on when you're jumping between the batteries, the electric motors, and the gas engine, and it seems to go back and forth very seamlessly. It's not just a straightforward internal combustion engine. So when you think about the complications of the design and the fact that they've been doing it for over 20 years and the reliability is still just knock it out of the park good, it should kind of lay people's fears to rest when it comes to, I want a new Camry, but I've never had a hybrid before. So looking at Consumer Reports data, people should kind of chill out about this, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this 2.5 is not a brand new motor. For Toyota, we've seen this in some of their kind of more recent models, and along with the hybrid technology, and it's implemented very well. And from a technician's point of view, being under the hood, when we do our fuel economy testing, we actually put a device on the car. And all recent Toyotas have been very easy to do. Everything looks really well laid out under the hood. So from another reliability standpoint, eventually things happen, need some maintenance, stuff needs to be repaired. I think it's going to be easy to get done in most cases. Where some cars, when we put this fuel system on, it's kind of a nightmare, and it can take hours to do. But all the recent Toyota stuff, and I took a look at these two Camrys that we had, and I don't suspect there'll be any kind of a problem there either. So again, I think that speaks to their thought process, and again to the reliability and ease of fixing when that does come about.
So like inexpensive to run, probably inexpensive to maintain. So that's kind of another thing going for it.
It is worth noting for maintenance. So this 2.5 in the Camry for 2025 will be using 0W8 motor oil, which we first saw in the Crown. So our Crown that we bought, that was the first time we'd seen it. At the time, the oil was a little difficult to get, but you can get it at Toyota, certainly now, and we're going to start seeing that in the aftermarket at the parts stores and things like that too.
Right, but for Talking Cars listeners and viewers, how is this oil, this weight oil, different than sort of
sure? It's thinner, basically. So they're going after fuel economy and emissions with it. So that's probably one of the reasons the car should get really nice fuel economy. I actually did a pour test with it. I put some in the freezer, and it pours like water almost even after spending a day in the freezer.
And it comes only as a synthetic, I assume.
It's a full synthetic, yep.
Right.
And as of just sort of recently, available at Toyota. I actually have a bottle on my desk I should have brought over, but
So that'll raise the price a little bit.
a little bit.
Well, right. Yeah. To Gabe's point, usually we talk about synthetic oil and people immediately think, Mobil 1, and that's expensive oil. And like if you have a Porsche or a BMW, some high-end car that requires a synthetic oil, you have to think, well, my oil changes are going to be a lot more than an average car. So do you think that, is Toyota going into that, realm of more expensive oil changes?
I mean, I guess the short answer is yes, because it is a synthetic oil and they typically do cost a little bit more. But basically all new cars are requiring synthetic. That's what they're coming with from the factory. That's what they're recommending. Anytime you buy oil at a dealership, you're probably going to pay a couple extra dollars a quart anyway. But I'm sure Toyota is very mindful of this, right? They sort of know what their customer will tolerate, especially the Camry customer for the services. Toyota's come with Toyota Care as well, so your first couple of services are covered anyway, which is nice. So it gets dealer service, you get the rotates done, you get the oil changes done at Toyota, and then the experts are keep an eye on your car, right? They're the ones underneath it and seeing if anything has come up and needs to be taken care of. So I don't think it's a bad thing overall. Basically everything is moving towards synthetic, unless you're still driving a 98, whatever. Yeah, stick with the conventional oil. You don't need to make the jump to synthetic necessarily, but basically everything that we're buying and testing now is coming with and recommended is synthetic.
Okay, so the proliferation is going towards synthetic. You mentioned getting the oil changed at the dealer. There's a lot of people that go to the quick, V-Lube places, stuff like that. Do you think they're going to have any issues getting this kind of special Toyota?
I mean, if you were
oil?
doing it today, yeah, it might be something to bring up. I think, because how many Crowns have they sold? I don't know what the number is, but I've seen a few on the road. But once, Camry becomes available and there's a ton of these on the road and they get outside Toyota Care, people will be going to these oil change places and the independents. So you will be able to get this stuff eventually at the regular auto parts stores.
Yeah, so go through your 2 years first free maintenance, and by that time you might see it that kind of oil more proliferant.
Well, absolutely.
Toyota does not usually jump into the deep end of the pool without thinking very carefully about it.
100%.
So we'll definitely have to see how this pans out. And just a reminder, this is just our first impressions of the Camry, and we will be buying our own test car and look forward to putting through our usual testing repertoire. And that brings us to our audience questions. We love getting your questions. Text 30-second videos. Send them all to talkingcars@icloud.com. That's talkingcars@icloud.com. First up is a question. This is from Marty from Beloit, Wisconsin. Your recent video on the Fisker Ocean brought this to mind. One thing I remember from CR's test from the 1960s and 70s were itemized lists of defects on test cars. Mildly distorted windshield glass or flaws in the paint were fairly common and of minor consequences, while loose or missing lug nuts or a side window slipping out of its track might be more egregious. I also recall if a car did especially poorly in these tests, it might earn a not recommended or not acceptable rating. Have any vehicles in recent memory been so riddled with defects as to severely affect their overall rating, and have any cars come close to being rated not acceptable? So there's two guys sitting at this table that have been here a while. One guy has been here a bit longer than me. So Gabe, I'm going to turn to you and see what you can tell Marty about, looking at defects and whatnot.
Well, that's some impressive memory there, Marty. But yeah, you're right. We used to list sample defects that came on our car. If you remember correctly, the paragraph in the magazine always followed the reliability of the car, which came from survey, from real owners. And it kind of created a bit of an implication or a confusion that these sample defects affect the reliability. And we decided, this is only our sample. There isn't a whole lot of value here. And we decided to stop the sample defects and make room for other things. Like we started evaluating fit and finish, for instance, that we hadn't done until then. Now, as to the not acceptable, that was a very rare kind of thing that only applied to a safety situation, like if a car tipped up in our avoidance maneuver, for instance, and threatened to roll over. So we Haven't seen that of late, luckily. But one example I'll highlight here is in 2010, we tested the Lexus GX that tended to oversteer too much or fishtail in our avoidance maneuver and in our track handling before the stability control came into play. And we issued do not buy for that car, and then Toyota stopped selling it until they figured it out and reprogrammed the stability control and went back on sale.
Yeah, and that kind of supports the not the argument, but we're having a lot more communication with car companies, and we kind of let them know ahead of time. We're seeing an issue with this car.
Right. We think that's a much better contribution to
right. And some
we help consumers, we help companies. So
right, and some manufacturers like Tesla can do over-the-air updates. We found some issues with the braking performance. They said, okay, let us work on this. They did the over-the-air update. We retested it, and the brakes got better. But Mike, like one of the things that you do here is you check in the new test cars, and when Marty's talking about like sample defects and whatnot, you're thinking like, did it come from the factory this way? Is this an issue of dealer prep? Them not,
Sure.
sweating all the details, and so you've probably seen a little bit in your time.
Yeah,
as well.
So from what I've seen recently, most of the things that have been, let's say, wrong with a car, probably happened at the dealer or maybe during transport. We have seen some damage to paint and things like that. Usually, you get that sort of checked at the dealer. You walk the car around, before you pay and sign for it. To varying degrees, right? It might be a little door ding, might be a little scuff on a wheel, to actually quite a bit of damage on one car in one case, and we elected basically not to buy that car, and we got a different car. So as far as things, sort of from the factory sort of going wrong, it's basically been software kind of issues, right. Which hopefully get corrected pretty easily. There's been a few kind of recently, like the Blazer had some software stuff. Chevrolet did issue the stop sale, and they came out with an update, and it's been quite honestly better. Can't say it's 100% perfect. I haven't, sort of gone through every system, but it is much better. So that software update the manufacturers allows them to be a little quicker, I think, in the response as to what they were probably way back in the day, and, rolling out these fixes. But I think most of what we've seen sort of, quote unquote problems, a lot of it was either happened during prep or on the dealer lot, or maybe lack of prep, things like that. For the most part, I would say, little things. I think our Model 3's A-pillar trim fell off as Ryan was driving it back after he had purchased it. We've had some check engine light stuff on relatively new cars within the first few hundred miles. I'll be getting back on the dealership. They diagnose them, get them fixed. We really haven't had massive issues there.
Right. And you guys have talked about like digital issues that cars are coming with. But sometimes even you'll see like when a new car comes to the dealer, like there's all this blue tape like in the interior. Yeah. And I would say half the time we can find some little strips of tape here and there that they forgot to take off.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many of them. Sometimes that's the technician's job. Sometimes it's the detail department's job. I feel sometimes, a lot of times that detail happens the day of delivery. And basically at that point, like when we're on our way, they know it's us because they have to get the car registered to us. I sort of feel like in some cases, like, they know who it's going to. They sort of stop like peeling the rest of it. Right. Because one of the things we also do when we buy is we don't let them sort of do the whole delivery process with us. We want to learn about the car ourselves, where normally if just an average person buys the car, you work with a salesperson, they have a delivery coordinator that, pairs your phone, gets all the app and stuff set up, shows you how to use everything. And we just take the car. We say, thanks, we'll figure it out. Right. So a lot of those things I think would probably get caught as you go through the car, and they show you how to, fold the second row seats. They see that little piece of, film, and they can just kind of quick pull it off. So that might be a unique to us scenario.
And often, even if they know that it's us already, we can still see overinflated tires and such.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
When cars are being delivered, usually the tires are overinflated, and then it's the dealer's job to adjust to the proper pressure, and that sometimes doesn't happen.
What I liked about Marty's question is it looked back on Consumer Reports history. I'm sort of a historian myself, and it reminded me that we used to have a test called starting and running, which was back in the days of carburetors. So if it was cold out and you get it started, but it would chug and then it would stall or something like that. Or if it was too hot, it wouldn't restart. And the cars have gotten so much better. We don't do a test anymore called starting and running, thank goodness. And just so Marty and everyone knows that we're always looking at how we're testing vehicles. We're looking at our processes. We're always trying to get better and dropping some tests. Well, sometimes that's what we have to do.
Keeping with the times.
Right. Anyway, great question. Loved that one. Next up is Seth, who writes, we don't have a Tesla, and so there are many more options for home chargers for EV vehicles. What do you recommend? And Seth, luckily we have Mike Crossan here, who is really becoming an EV expert here at Consumer Reports Test Track. And you, I'm sure, have a great answer for Seth.
Yeah, so Seth from Parts Unknown. I wonder what EV you do have. You said you didn't have a Tesla, but I'm just curious as to what you may.
Or maybe he's thinking about buying
Absolutely,
one,
sure.
and then thinking ahead to what kind of charger we should get.
And yeah, if you, let's just say if you are getting the Tesla, it makes it kind of easy. You just get the Tesla home charger and you're done. You don't have to think about it too much. But there are a lot of other chargers out there. And I agree, it can be overwhelming. So what I would say is you need to think about, Seth, what your situation is. Think about maybe either what car you have or maybe what car you're planning on getting in the future. Look at, your house or your apartment or your condo, whatever it is you have. What's your parking situation? Do you want this hardwired to the wall? If you're leasing somewhere, probably better to get one that actually has the plug so you can easily take the charger with you and you don't have to then hire an electrician to move it. How long of a charging cord do you need? Are you keeping the charger in the garage, but you plan on charging outside? Do you have to move cars throughout the driveway and things like that.
So driveway, not a garage.
Correct. So look at specs of the chargers. Personally, when I got the one for my house, I went for one that was a plug-in style and that had a really long cord. I mounted mine in the garage, but I know I'll be charging the vehicle outside. So this way my driveway is set up and I have a lot of cars in my driveway. I wanted as much flexibility as possible. So hopefully I didn't have to move 3 cars, just to charge one. Think about future-proofing as well. As cars evolve, the charging rates theoretically are going up. I think our Lyriq is at 19.1 kilowatt an hour on like level 2. And that's about as high as you're going to get for level 2 at a house that gets around about 80 amps. That's a lot of electricity. But theoretically, that car is capable of it. And if you were a Lyriq buyer, it might be worth looking into a charger that can support that along within the home infrastructure, right?
Yeah, you're going to need to have a 100 amp circuit breaker and hardwired. So yeah, with a plug-in type, yeah, it's convenient, it's portable, but you're limited to the amount of amperage you can take advantage of. And if you have an onboard charger in an EV that has an 11 kilowatt type, which is pretty common these days, then in order to benefit from that, you're going to want to be hardwired on a 50 amp circuit breaker, so you can benefit from that. And what that means is that you're going to get maybe 35 miles of range per hour of charging as opposed to 20 or 22.
So another thing I think that we sometimes don't initially think about with the chargers, we tend to relate this to the cars, but are the apps. Some of these chargers have their own app as well. And in some cases, you actually need to have an account in the app to like quote unquote unlock the charger to actually get sort of its full potential. So when I got the one for my house, I picked one that there is an app for, but you don't need the app. It will operate at its full potential. I can rely on the car's app to start and stop charging and all that kind of stuff. I just didn't want to have another app in my life.
Right.
That being said, there are some chargers that don't even have an app. So if you're not an app person, you don't want to use it, you can get one to save a few dollars, probably a couple $100 by getting a quote unquote like a non-smart charger. Versus if you like apps and you want to have that controllability, definitely spend a little bit extra money and get one that has an app. So again, that might be something that you don't even think about. You're like, oh, they're all the same. They all probably have that connectivity. Some do, some don't. And some you have to get full access. Which could be annoying, if you didn't plan on actually using an app, right?
Right.
And let me add that, don't be tempted and don't get a really cheap charger that only does 16 amps. That'll be slow charging. And also make sure you get a UL certified unit so you have a peace of mind that it's been tested and it's been certified and it's safe. And don't forget to check out our story online. We tested a bunch of them. They all do the same thing, and we have some favorites there.
Right. And so we've gone from carburetors to being electrical experts all in one podcast, which is pretty awesome. Anyway, love these questions, especially diving in deep into EVs, which is what we've been doing the last several years here at Consumer Reports. And that will about do it for this episode, which was produced, of course, by super producer Dave Abrams and expertly edited by Andrew I Still Play Hockey Belize and Anatoly the Great Shumsky. As always, check the show notes for more information on the vehicles and the topics that we discussed. And just a reminder, keep the questions coming, talkingcars@icloud.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.